Well, everyone, we have to talk about another phone in 2021, and this one is none other than the iPhone 7. Now, this is one of those phones that when it initially came out was pretty much a pretty controversial phone. It removed the headphone jack, but we did get AirPods. We did get a lot of other things during this announcement, which was really cool. And I can definitely tell you this phone has a much longer lifespan than I initially thought, and I think this phone in a way may be worth it more now than what it was last year, which is very insane. So if you want to pick one of these phones up, I'll find the cheapest ones on Amazon, link them down in the description below. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time, but I'll also probably leave some other recommendations that I would recommend beyond than just the iPhone 7 that are probably better deals than this. But other than that, looking on the front of the iPhone 7, we still have that same 4.7 inch panel that's been on pretty much all these iPhones from 2014 up until like 2017, and I can definitely tell you the panel itself isn't bad. It's not an ugly panel, but of course it doesn't have an OLED panel. It is IPS. It doesn't have a 1440p, or it doesn't even have a 1080p display. It's a little bit above standard HD, and I still think it's an okay panel. No 120 Hz, but it's totally okay. This is a 2016 phone, so it's pretty much going to be 5 years old this year, so it's totally understandable about specific things that are missing out on it, but the design is still a bit dated. But to make you feel better, the iPhone SE2 that just came out in 2019, that thing's design is almost the same exact thing as this, to be completely honest. You still have the home button and pretty much the same design on it, so keep that in mind. Of course, this is an older phone, but it doesn't really feel like you have a super old phone when you have a device like this, so that's another pretty big thing to keep in mind. Now, you do have that lightning port on the bottom, which, like I said before, no headphone jack on this device. And on the back, you have the aluminum back, which I still think is this phone's, one of its stronger assets, because it still feels like a pretty premium device when you compare it against even a lot of phones that came out in 2019, even probably now in 2020. By the time you're watching this, you've probably seen that all phones have a glass back on it, and that's pretty much how a premium phone is differentiated from, a standard phone. And this phone, with the aluminum back, it definitely still feels very premium. It's definitely miles ahead of a plastic back or anything. It's just a little bit less than a glass back, so keep that in mind. But I will definitely tell you this phone has IP certification. It doesn't feel cheap, and it feels like a very premium phone when you're holding it in your hand. So I think in the build quality standpoint, it still holds up pretty well. Now, above that back, you do have a single camera setup, which I have said before, it's not a bad camera setup at all. Even back then, it was pretty good. But I think because the iPhone 7 Plus at that time had an additional, telephoto lens, that made this one really seem a bit outdated, because that's when we started seeing Apple put in multiple sensors on those devices. Now, on the iPhone 7, you have that 12 megapixel lens, and it's a wide angle lens, and you have capability on it at the end of the day. You have 4K at 30, which is really cool. And I've actually done in 2019 a ton of photo and video comparisons between this phone and a lot of other phones that came out, including the iPhone 12 Pros, the Galaxy S20s, I think the Note 20s, and maybe the OnePluses as well. And it's like a random comparison just to see where they stand. And I still think the iPhone 7's photos are pretty good outdoors. Indoor photos, though, are not that good. They are very grainy. So if you're somebody who wants to take a lot of indoor photos and you don't have that great of lighting, you may not do so well with something like an iPhone 7. So that is another pretty big thing to keep in mind. And I feel like the biggest detrimental factor of this phone isn't necessarily the back camera. It's more so the front camera, because you only have a 7 megapixel camera on the front. You can do full HD videos, but there's no, 1080p at 60. There's no 4K video resolutions on the front, and that's becoming kind of like the norm. Very soon, I feel like within the next couple of years, 4K on the front, a lot more people are going to start filming in 4K. And if you're somebody who makes a lot of videos on your front camera, you make a lot of YouTube videos, you make a lot of Instagram posts, you post a lot of selfies, and you make a lot of TikTok videos, having a phone like this isn't bad, but you're definitely going to feel like you have somewhat of an outdated camera at the end of the day. So that's definitely a huge thing I want to get through. The back camera is pretty okay still. I have to give in the factor that it is a 5-year-old phone almost, but the front camera is something that may not be the best for a lot of people. And if you're in, not the best, lighting conditions, and if you're taking a lot of photos indoors, you're not necessarily going to have that great of experience with the front camera. But the back camera, I think, is good enough for the most part. So in terms of the camera, that pretty much covers it up. Now, software-wise, if you remember early on in this video, I pretty much said that this phone's lifelong, the longevity of it may last longer than I thought. It's because potentially the iPhone 7 may, probably be getting iOS 15. That's pretty much what the rumors are saying. But I kind of think that the iPhone 7, and based off some other things that I think, the iPhone 7 may even get iOS 16, and it's not unheard of. We've seen this time and time again with a lot of phones. If you look at the iPhone 5S, from the iPhone 5S to the iPhone 5, the 5S lasted a much longer time. It's still kind of getting support, and I kind of see the iPhone 7 kind of following in that same, blueprint as well. So that's going to be super insane if that ends up being the case, because before I thought maybe iOS 14 would be it, but it looks like the success is going out, including the SE. I doubt Apple would go ahead and remove the iPhone, 7 as well in that, mix up. So that could potentially mean that the iPhone 7's longevity could actually last a pretty long time. It could be lasting up until like 2022. And maybe this phone will also get security updates on top of that as well. It's a thought, but that would be something that would be really, really cool as well. So right now we aren't really 100% too sure, but it would be something that would be really awesome to kind of look at. And I definitely do think the longevity of this device is definitely going to be pretty impressive. So in terms of the software department, that pretty much covers it up. Now performance wise, and pretty much how this phone performs and is going to be performing in 2020. This phone, when it first came out, had that Apple A10 Fusion chip inside of it, a quad-core CPU with 2 gigabytes of RAM on every single model of this phone. I think there were 3 different models, and each one of those had 2 gigs of RAM. Now, what I can tell you is, and I've been saying this for my other reviews as well, because it's just like the realest thing I can say, and it's the thing that makes the most amount of sense. Basically, with a phone like an iPhone 7, it surprises me how smooth and how kind of fast this thing is. Now, with that being said, it's not a fast phone by any means, and it's not a smooth phone by any means in this day and age. When I, have a phone like the iPhone 7, and I have a phone like a OnePlus 8 Pro, or I have a phone like an iPhone 12 Pro Max, those phones are the smoothest phones right now. Those phones are fast. And if a manufacturer released a phone like an iPhone 7 right now with the same performance and everything, it would not even be talked about. It would be like pathetic. Like, why would they even release a phone like that? But because this phone is the age that it is, and because it was what it was at the time, and the price drop, because you can pick up these things for like less than $100, you have to factor in all those different things into the performance segment. And because of that, the iPhone 7's performance for getting the amount of software updates that it has stands at a really decent spot. It's it's a pretty fast phone. It's not the fastest phone ever. It's slower than every phone that's came out after it, but it's still a functioning phone, and it's definitely faster than the previous phones, which I've already reviewed, the 6S and the 6S Plus. And the biggest thing that I can tell you is that pretty much if you have a phone like an iPhone 7, as long as you're not comparing it side by side to another iPhone, that's better. But more so than that, if you're not necessarily the person who has to just open up apps as fast as possible and multitask a bunch in the background as well, I don't really think you're going to have a horrible experience with this phone, because once you have an app up on the display, so it's open and everything, it's going to work perfectly fine. It's going to function. A lot of games still work perfectly fine on this thing at really good frame rates. If you open up like Snapchat and all these other apps, once it's loaded, you're good to go. It just depends on, how long it takes to load. That's really the biggest problem. But on top of that, the other issue here is that the RAM management is definitely not that great on a device like this. With only 2 gigs of RAM, it's pretty good for an iPhone because, iPhones with iOS, they don't need to have that much RAM inside of it. But the RAM is probably going to be another huge area where you're going to probably, mess up bad, or the apps are going to be closing out in the background and stuff. So that's another pretty big thing. But I think for a majority of people, you're going to be perfectly fine with this type of performance if you know what you're getting into. If you're expecting to get the fastest phone or even the best iPhone for the, price tag for, a performance standpoint, this is definitely not it. But I think it's an okay, performing phone in 2021. So in terms of the performance segment, that really pretty much covers it up. Now ending it off with the battery life. This thing's battery life when it came out, 1,960 milliamp hours, is definitely not that great. iOS 14 has taken a toll a bit on the battery life on all my devices, and it has degraded quite a bit as well on my personal device. If you get a brand new iPhone, that may be a little bit different, but I would say this is a little bit below average in 2020 standpoint, especially when we have phones that have like over 3,000 milliamp hour batteries. So that's another kind of big thing to keep in mind. So to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, is the iPhone 7 still worth it in the later part of 20 or the early part or just in 2021 in general? Well, what I can tell you is that for a majority of people out there, having a phone like an iPhone 7 is a completely capable phone, including me. If I had to use the iPhone 7, I don't really do anything crazy on my device. I just go on Instagram and like TikTok and stuff, and I have a good time on it. And I don't care, as long as it's a functioning device, it's good. But I will tell you, there are some caveats to this phone that for me personally would cause a couple of problems. And a few of those things are basically the battery life. This phone's battery life isn't that great anymore, especially with iOS 14. It has been a bit more optimized, within, I think, iOS 14.3 has fixed a lot of those problems. And if you're watching this video like deep into 2021 when like iOS 15 comes out, then iOS 14 may have, been improved, and I can make like other videos about it later on this year. But I'll definitely tell you, I think the battery is probably the biggest, problem for me. The longevity is still kind of there because you're going to be getting most potentially the next version of software, which is good. So you're not really going to feel like you're missing out on too many crazy features. The design isn't something that's super crazy to me either. I don't love that design, but if I had to use it, I would totally be okay with it. The display itself isn't horrible. It's not an ugly display either, but I just feel like the performance and specifically the RAM management would be an area what I wouldn't really be too happy about. I feel like apps would close out in the background all the time, especially I don't use any crazy heavy apps, but I do like, being able to go from one app to the other and not necessarily having to, reopen that app every single time. So that's another kind of big thing to keep in mind. But if I had to use the iPhone 7, I would probably be okay with that. I would not care at all. Just like 2 years ago, I was using the 7 Plus as my main device, and I had a really good time with it, and I love that phone. So this phone is no different. And I will tell you, if you have a phone like an iPhone 7, I would recommend keeping it for as long as possible. I pretty much always say that because that's usually the best thing to go, do is just keep it until the other phones go down in value. But if you have the opportunity, if you have the money to do, upgrade, getting an iPhone XR, from an iPhone 7 is a huge upgrade as well. There's so much capability with a phone like that, and that's always a phone I would recommend to people. The iPhone XR is a very good phone. I think you can pick it up for like around $300. So that's a really, really good value of a phone too. And you can pick it up brand new from Apple for $499. So the choice is yours. I would probably also link an iPhone 11 down in the description. That's another really good phone you can pick up. And like I said, all the phones that are linked down below, you can get them from there for the cheapest prices that I find and help support the channel at the same time. So that's really pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section as well. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count. So it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.